What if the perfect samurai wife wasn't just a symbol of loyalty and grace, but someone living under constant pressure, fear, and duty? In movies, she's often portrayed as quiet, elegant, and endlessly devoted. But the reality? It was far more complicated and much darker. Behind those serene expressions were women trained in discipline, secrecy, and sometimes even combat. They were expected to manage households like miniature fortresses, uphold their family's honor, and if necessary, give their lives to protect it. Yet their stories were almost erased from history. Most of their lives happened behind paper screens, recorded only through letters or the quiet whispers of those who served them. But if you look closer, the image of the perfect samurai wife starts to crack, revealing a world of hidden power, silent rebellion, and impossible expectations. Every morning began the same way, quiet, controlled, and painfully precise. Before the first light touched the paper doors, before the birds called through the mist, a samurai wife was already awake. Her day wasn't her own. It belonged to her husband's house, his reputation, and the invisible rules that governed every breath she took. She would kneel before the small mirror, her reflection flickering in lamplight. Her face had to be calm, emotionless, disciplined, perfect. In silence, she layered her kimono, one fold at a time, each movement deliberate. Even her dressing was a ritual of obedience. The silk brushed against her skin like armor, concealing every trace of individuality. A samurai wife's beauty was meant to inspire respect, not desire. Her appearance wasn't vanity, it was duty. A wrinkle could be seen as a negligence, a misplaced pin as a failure of control. The smallest flaw could be whispered about in neighboring households, quietly staining her husband's honor. By dawn, the servants would stir. She'd glide through the corridors, without a sound, her footsteps measured, her words few. In this world, power wasn't in how loudly one spoke. It was in the ability to command, without ever raising a voice. Yet, beneath her calm, she carried a constant, suffocating tension. The fear that one mistake, one misstep, could unravel everything she'd built. Breakfast was not affection, it was performance. The rice had to be perfectly steamed, the soup clear, the pickles precise. She would kneel as she served, bowing slightly, not as a wife greeting her husband, but as a subordinate paying respect to her superior. He might discuss matters of honor or politics, his tone distant and formal. She would nod, respond only when addressed, and never linger too long on any word. Her silence was expected, rehearsed, and rewarded. Inside, she might want to ask questions, to voice her thoughts, but those thoughts had no place here. The samurai code prized obedience above emotion, so she swallowed her words and smiled with restraint, even when her heart felt heavy. Inside, she might want to ask questions about the decisions being made, the wars being fought, or even the future of her children. But those thoughts had no place here. The samurai code prized obedience above emotion, silence above curiosity. A wife's wisdom was to be unseen, her intelligence disguised as grace. So, when a thought rose to her lips, she swallowed it like medicine, bitter, necessary, and never to be spoken of again. Sometimes she'd glance across the table, wanting to speak not as a subordinate, but as a partner, to ask him what he truly feared, or if he ever felt the same loneliness she did. But his eyes were always elsewhere, on duty, on honor, on the unending cycle of expectation that ruled them both. And so she smiled, not because she was happy, but because she had learned that silence kept peace. Her heart might ache, but her face could never betray it. The samurai world didn't make space for softness, even in women. Every smile was measured, every expression calculated. She had mastered the art of appearing serene while quietly unraveling inside. And when he finally rose to leave, his sandals clicking softly against the wooden floor, she bowed low, her forehead nearly brushing the mat. The sound of the door sliding shut behind him felt like the turning of a key, locking her world back into stillness. Only when his footsteps faded into the morning did she let out a slow, quiet breath. That single exhale, that tiny, secret act, was hers alone. It was the only freedom she could claim, and even that had to end quickly, because the moment silence returned, duty replaced relief. She straightened her back, adjusted her sleeves, and began her rounds. The household was her empire, vast in responsibility, invisible in recognition. Servants awaited orders, letters needed sealing, offerings required preparation. Every hour came with tasks that demanded precision and grace. A misplaced bow could offend a guest of higher rank. A servant's clumsy mistake could tarnish the family's image. And every misstep, no matter how small, reflected not on the servant, but on her. She bore the invisible weight of perfection, knowing the smallest rumor could travel through the district faster than any messenger. The walls of her home were paper, but the judgment they held was solid as stone. She could feel it pressing on her, from the elders, the neighbors, the other wives who watched her every move. To falter was to feed gossip. To complain was to invite disgrace. So she learned to endure. Even her emotions had their own code. Grief had to be silent. Anger had to be hidden. Joy had to be modest. There was no room for the chaos of being human. When she was sad, she wrote poetry that no one would ever read. When she was angry, she cleaned until her hands trembled. When she was lonely, she recited prayers just to hear her own voice. All those feelings, the exhaustion, the longing, the desperate need to be seen, she buried under layers of calm that no one dared question. But every now and then, when she passed by the open garden, she would stop. The sound of the wind in the bamboo, the distant echo of the temple bell, they reminded her of what life might have been if she weren't bound by honor and silence. For just a heartbeat, she'd let herself imagine it. A life where she could laugh without shame, speak without fear, and breathe without consequence. Then she'd lower her gaze, fold her hands neatly, and step back into her world. The perfect samurai wife once more. By afternoon, she supervised lessons for her children. Her sons practiced sword forms. Her daughters learned poetry, calligraphy, and etiquette. She taught them to bow correctly, to speak carefully, to never show too much emotion. The same lessons that had been carved into her since childhood. She loved them deeply, but even love had to be disciplined. A mother's tenderness was allowed only in private, behind closed doors. As dusk fell, the house filled with the scent of burning incense. The servants prepared for her husband's return, and she checked every corner once more. No wrinkle in the mats, no dust in the alcove, no imperfection left to see. The calm she presented was her shield, but inside she lived in two worlds, the one she showed and the one she felt. On the outside, she was the perfect samurai wife, composed, loyal, obedient. On the inside, she was a woman trapped in a performance she could never stop acting. When night came, she bowed before the household altar, whispering her prayers as candlelight flickered on her face. To anyone watching, she looked serene, but in her heart, she carried a question she'd never dare speak aloud. What would happen if I ever stopped being perfect?